Welcome back. It's your boy, better yet the man, Cody, here for another one. Grab a drink with me and let's read chapter 3 before bed. Chapter 3 of If Life is a Game, These Are the Rules. Chapter 3, There are no mistakes, only lessons. Growth is a process of experimentation, a series of trials, errors, and occasional victories. The failed experiments are as much a part of the process as the experiments that work. Human growth is a process of experimentation, trial and error, ultimately leading to wisdom. Each time you choose to trust yourself and take action, you can never quite be certain how the situation will turn out. Sometimes you're victorious, and sometimes you become disillusioned. The failed experiments, however, are no less valuable than the experiments that ultimately prove successful. In fact, you usually learn more from the perceived failures than you do from the perceived successes. Most people feel great disappointment and anger when their plans they invested a great deal of energy, time, and money fall through. The first reaction for most of us is to feel that we have failed. While it's easy enough to jump to this depressing conclusion, it will impede your ability to progress with your life lessons. Rather than viewing your own mistakes as failures and others' mistakes as slights, you can view them as opportunities to learn. As Emerson said, every calamity is a spur and a valuable hint. Every situation in which you do not live up to your own expectations is an opportunity to learn something about your own thoughts and behaviors. Every situation in which you feel wronged by another person is a chance to learn something about your reactions. Whether it's your own wrongdoing or someone else's, a mistake is simply an opportunity to evolve further along your spiritual path. When you consider the hardships of life, the disappointments, hurts, losses, illnesses, and all the tragedies you may suffer, and shift your perspective to see them as opportunities for learning and growth, you become empowered. You can take charge of your life and rise to the challenges instead of feeling defeated, victimized, or cast adrift. A wonderful story that illustrates this is from The Speed of Light by Gwyneth Cravens. Assad told her a story. It was about a young girl from Morocco whose father was a spinner. He became prosperous in his craft and took her with him on a voyage to the Mediterranean. He wanted to sell his thread and told his daughter that she should also look for a young man who would make her a good husband. But a storm caused the ship to flounder near Egypt, killing the father and casting the daughter ashore. Miserable and exhausted, barely able to remember her previous life, the girl wandered in the sand until she finally met a family of weavers. They took her in, taught her how to make clothes. Eventually, she became contented. But after a few years, she was captured on the seashore by slavers who then sailed east to Istanbul and took her to the slave market. A man who made ships' masts went to the market to buy slaves to help him with his work. But when he noticed the girl, he took pity on her, bought her, and took her home to serve as his wife. But pirates stole the cargo he invested in, and he was unable to buy the other slaves. He, the girl, and his wife had to make all the masts themselves. The girl worked hard and conscientiously. New word I learned today. The mast maker found her to be so capable that he eventually granted her freedom and made her a partner in the business, which she came to enjoy. One day, he asked her to accompany a shipment of masts to Java. She agreed, but off the coast of China, the ship was struck by a typhoon. Again, she was washed up on a strange shore, and again she cried out against her fate. "Why do these bad things keep happening to me?" she asked. No one came. She got up out of the sand and started walking. There is a legend in China that a foreign woman would appear and make a tent for the emperor. Because nobody in China knew how to make tents, The whole population, including the generation of emperors after another, wondered after this prediction. Once a year, the emperor sent out emissaries to every town to bring all the foreign women to the royal court. In due course, the shipwrecked woman arrived before the emperor, who asked her through an interpreter if she could make a tent. "I think I can," she said. She asked for rope, but the Chinese had none, and so, recalling her girlhood as a daughter of a spinner, she asked for silk and spun it into a rope. She asked for thick cloth, but the Chinese had none, and so, recalling her life among the weavers, she wove the kind of clothes used for tents. She asked for tent poles, but the Chinese had none, and so, recalling her life as a mask maker, she made tent poles. When she had all of these things ready, she tried to remember as best she could all the tents she had seen in her life, and she put together a tent. The emperor marveled at the construction and at the fulfillment of the old prophecy, and offered whatever she wanted. She married a handsome prince, remained in China, surrounded by her children, and lived to a happy old age. And she realized that although her adventures had seemed terrible when they were happening, they turned out to be essential for her ultimate happiness. Wow. The girl in Assad's story saw, in hindsight, the magic within her dreadful circumstances. She was able to see the perfection in the grand scheme of things. While it was not always easy for us to view our situation from a macro perspective, it's essential in order to find the good in what appears to be the unfortunate circumstances. To ease this process of learning, you must first master the basic lessons of compassion, forgiveness, ethics, and ultimately, humor. Without these essential lessons, you remain trapped in your limited view and unable to parlay mistakes into valuable learning opportunities. Interesting. Compassion. The individual is capable of both great compassion and great indifference. He has it within his means to nourish the former and outgrow the latter. Norman Cousins. Compassion is the act of opening your heart. To live in a state of compassion means you approach the world with your emotional barriers lowered and your ability to connect with others intact. Compassion is the emotional glue that keeps you rooted Compassion is the emotional glue that keeps you rooted in the universality of the human experience, and it connects you to the essence of those around you. We do not all walk around with our hearts wide open all of the time. However, doing so would leave us overwhelmed and in emotional danger. If I kept my heart open and exposed while watching the 6 o'clock news every night, I would most likely never recover from the rush of helplessness and hopeless feelings created by all the tragic stories. Sometimes, it's necessary to keep your emotional barriers up as a way to protect yourself. The key to learning the lesson of compassion is realizing that you are in control of the erection or destruction of those barriers. This creates distance between you and others. You can choose to dissolve these barriers when you want to connect with the heart of another human being. You can also choose to limit others' access to your heart when you need to, by forming judgments that separate you from that which you are judging. Judgments are not always negative. Your judgments are what keep you from walking around like an open membrane, open and exposed to whatever information you come in contact with. At times, your judgment serves to help you decide what benefits, what beliefs, and thoughts you choose to let in from your outside world and help you discern what is true for you. Without your sense of judgment, you would be bombarded with hundreds of conflicting ideas over which you would have no power to discriminate. At other times, however, your judgment can limit you and prevent you from being compassionate when and where it's needed. When your judgment becomes more overpowering than your ability to practice empathy, you separate yourself from your own human essence. You put yourself into a box of self-righteousness and seal yourself off from the innate need to connect with other people. You may feel superior to those you are judging, but you may also feel the chill of loneliness imposed by your isolation. The only antidote to rigid judgment is compassion. The secret to learning to open your heart is the willingness to connect to your essence and the essence of the person you are judging. From there, the magic of compassion opens limitless doors to human connection. In order to learn a lesson of compassion, you will first need to recognize when you have become trapped by your own limiting judgments. The best way to do this is to pay attention to your breathing. If your breathing feels shallow or tight, you are most likely trapped in a judgment that needs to be released. Your conscious mind can also help identify what compassion is called for. Chances are, if you're able to pause in the middle of making a judgment long enough to consider compassion, then compassion is required. You would not have entertained the thought otherwise. As you learned in Rule 2, you have the ability to choose whether or not you will learn the lessons you are presented with, so you will then need to use your discernment to choose whether to invite in compassion or remain closed. If you choose compassion, then you need to move the judgment from its position in your mind down to the emotional realm of your heart. It is there that you can try on what it would feel like to be the person you are judging and imagine putting yourself in their reality. This will connect you to the essence and evaporate the judgment encrusted around your heart. A story that my friend Nikki told me about how she learned the lesson of compassion is one of the most powerful examples of human kindness I've ever heard. As a child, Nikki and her friend were molested on their way home from school by a man in a brown car. Nikki memorized the license plate of the brown car and told the police, who captured the offender and arrested him. Nikki remained deeply troubled by the incident for so many years. As an adult, Nikki became a social worker. She never quite forgot the episode from her childhood, and so she had a particular softness for victims of child abuse and molestation. One day, she was given a case of a sex offender who needed rehabilitation. Much to Nikki's horror, it was the man in the brown car, still committing these acts 15 years later. What ting. Nikki's mind immediately flooded with judgment. She recalled the shame and the anger she felt all those years ago, and something close to hatred came towards this man rose up in her. She still had difficulty believing that anybody could commit such a heinous act. She had no intention of doing anything to help the man who was responsible for her terrible memories. In the midst of her judgment, Nikki realized one important fact, that this man was deeply troubled and he needed to be helped. Though it was one of the most difficult decisions she ever made, Nikki chose to allow her heart to open to this man and assist him with his recovery. She got in touch with the part of her that knew that everyone, including herself, was capable of committing inappropriate acts at times. By connecting her to the essence, she allowed herself to imagine the pain this man must have been feeling that caused him to behave in the way that he did. It was by imagining herself in his reality that she was able to release her judgments and move on to compassion. Compassion is also required at those times when you are harshly judging yourself. If you have made what you perceive to be a mistake, behaved in some way in which you were not proud, or failed to live up to your own expectation, you will most likely put up a barrier between your essence and the part of you that is the alleged wrongdoer. By doing this, you create a chasm wide enough to hold some severely self-critical thoughts. Such a barrier is no less restrictive or destructive than one that divides you from the other people. At those times, you will need to consciously open your heart to yourself and show compassion. Compassion will then open up the door to the possibility of forgiveness and will allow you to release those judgments that are holding you in self-content. What judgments do you need to transcend to learn the lesson of compassion? Give up your limiting beliefs. Give up your limiting beliefs and don't judge people. I can take a drink to that. Let us continue. Forgiveness. To err is human, to forgive divine. Alexander Pope. Forgiveness is the act of erasing an emotional debt. As you move from compassion to forgiveness, your heart is already open and you engage in a conscious and deliberate release of resentment. Perceiving past actions as mistakes implies guilt and blame, and it's not possible to learn anything meaningful while you are engaging in blaming. There are 4 kinds of forgiveness. The first is beginner forgiveness of yourself. Not long ago, I got lost in New York City subway. I was late for a meeting with a friend. causing her to wait for me in the freezing rain for nearly an hour. I felt absolutely terrible and was on the verge of beating myself up when I boarded yet another train to try to reach my destination. Excuse me. I felt absolutely terrible and was on the verge. I finally realized that I was doing the very best I could under the circumstances. I remembered the value of extending compassion towards myself and made amends to sincerely apologize when I reached my friend. I then released the situation. The second kind of forgiveness is beginner forgiveness for another. This is where you need to forgive somebody for the moderate transgression. For instance, my friend who had to wait for me in the rain could have been really upset and held a grudge, but instead of harboring resentment, she graciously accepted my apology and we repaired the temporary rift. When I asked her to tell me how she forgave me so quickly, she said she knew I didn't intend to make her wait. She herself had been lost in the subway in the past and identified with my situation. Though she was initially annoyed, she recognized that staying angry would only waste her energy and cause more guilt. She chose to forgive me instead. You may resist learning this lesson because sometimes it feels good to blame people for their mistakes. It makes you feel superior, righteous, when you can look down your nose and hold a grudge towards someone who's wronged you. However, harboring resentment consumes a lot of energy. Why waste valuable energy on prolonged guilt and anger when you could use that energy for far greater things? When you let go of resentment, guilt, anger, you become revitalized and create space in your soul for growth. The third kind of forgiveness is advanced forgiveness of yourself. This is a serious transgression, the one you carry with deep shame. When you do something that violates your own values and ethics, you create a chasm between your standard, and your actual behavior, which compromises your integrity. You need to work very hard at forgiving yourself for those deeds so that you can close this chasm and realign with the best part of yourself. I'm not saying that you should drown out the voice of your conscience by rushing to forgive yourself or not feeling regret or remorse, but wallowing in these feelings for a protracted period of time is not healthy. Continuing to punish yourself only creates a bigger gap between you and your ethics. And the bigger the gap, the greater the chance that you will repeat the unaccepted behavior. Remember, your conscience is not your enemy. It is there to remind you to stay on track and stick to your values. Just notice the feeling it's sending you, learn the lesson, and move on. Literally just experienced that today. The last and perhaps most difficult kind of forgiveness is the advanced forgiveness of another. Everyone I know has been morally wronged or severely hurt by another person at some time in his or her life to such a degree that forgiveness seems impossible. However, harboring resentment and revenge fantasies only keeps you trapped in victimhood. It is only through forgiveness that you can erase wrongdoing and clear the slate. At the age of 45, a woman named Margot was abandoned by her husband. After 12 years of marriage, he emptied their bank accounts and safety deposit box and took off with another shardy. The book says woman, but you get the idea. Besides being emotionally devastated, Margot was terrified since she had no career training, no means of supporting herself. She felt a loathing towards her husband for which she had never imagined she was capable. It took Margot 3 years to get her life back on track. She borrowed money from her sister to go back to school, to get a mortgage broker's license, and eventually started her own business. Margot now feels a sense of real accomplishment since the business is thriving. Though she still feels sad about the loss of her husband, she no longer carries around this intense hatred that controlled her for so long. Margot was finally able to forgive her husband when she shifted out of victimhood and forced herself to see the bigger picture. She was able to shift the focus away from her anger onto seeing the opportunity for growth in the present situation. In hindsight, she can finally view the entire event as a valuable learning experience. After all, without this apparent tragedy, she might have never come into her own power and learned advanced forgiveness. So again, here are 4 kinds of forgiveness and how you can master each one. Number 1, beginning forgiveness of yourself. Be compassionate towards yourself for doing the best you could with the resources you had at that time. Make amends and then release the situation. Number 2, beginning forgiveness of another. Identify with that person's motivation so you can understand why she did what she did, show compassion, and release it. Number 3, advance forgiveness of yourself. Understand what you did. Make amends as best as you can, and then find it in your heart to absolve yourself. And number 4, advance forgiveness of another. Allow yourself to fully feel the hurt or anger so that you can release it. Then view the situation as a necessary part of your path of spiritual evolution. Ethics. There are no mistakes, no coincidence. All events are blessings given to us to learn from. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So, you made what you perceived to be a mistake. You eventually forgave yourself, made amends, and released the situation from your mind. You will still be left with one of the lingering lessons, the importance of ethics. Morality is conforming to the established standard of right and wrong that have been set by society in which you live. But ethical codes are not universal. There is no one set of guidelines that works for everybody around the world, since what we may consider morally wrong in one culture might be acceptable in another culture. For some, ethics is defined by religious laws. For others, moral codes arise from lessons learned in school or from the parents. Most people in our culture were raised with the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. At its most basic, ethics involve choosing right and good behavior in your relationship with others. When you constantly strengthen your ability to choose between right and wrong, while we have basic ethics instilled in us and know what is right and what is wrong in our hearts, life throws many situations at us where what is right is not always apparent. Life is complicated and full of gray areas. Each and every situation you find yourself in forces you to choose between the two. For example, when you were in school, you may have questioned whether it was right or wrong to let your friend cheat off you on a test. Your friend may have been unprepared for the test because he or she was having trouble at home. You knew it was wrong to let them cheat, but if you didn't, she could fail the test and then be even more problems to deal with. True. When your external factors reflect the internal code, you are in alignment with your morality. This is how an individual gains integrity. Integrity is important because without it, you are living with a sense of division within yourself. You feel incomplete and conflicted. You will know when you're not acting in alignment with your moral code, because your conscience will remind you of a difference between what is ethically right and how you actually behaved. You will most likely experience feelings of guilt or remorse that will serve as a clue to you that the lesson of ethics need to be learned. Whether or not you are discovered and punished for wrong behavior does not matter. You will intrinsically know that you behaved wrongly. You may have only yourself to answer to, but isn't your conscience a powerful teacher if you listen to it? Antonio deeply loved his wife Cynthia. He was a devoted husband, and their life was truly blessed and with harmony and compatibility. One weekend, while they were at a wedding for some close friends, something happened that threatened the idealistic life. Antonio found himself lusting after Cynthia's friend Vivian, and unable to contain his attraction, leaned over and kissed Vivian while the two were alone in the elevator of a hotel. Vivian returned his kiss, and they stood there, pressed up against the wall, with their arms around each other for several moments. Then suddenly, as if cold water was splashed on Antonio, abruptly came to his senses, pulled away and exclaimed, "What am I doing? I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. I have always been attracted to you, but this isn't right. I'm very sorry." Without hesitation, they agreed to dismiss the encounter as if it never happened. They exited the elevator and went back to their respective rooms. Antonio was devastated. How could he do such a thing? He wondered to himself. He knew he loved Cynthia more than anything in the world, and he was horrified by his actions. Riddled with shame and self-disgust, Antonio spent the rest of the weekend stewing. Sunday night, in the airport, as they waited for their plane home, Antonio was still tormented by guilt, an internal schism he had created between his ethics and his actions plagued his conscience, and he could not look his beloved wife in the eye. He finally decided to confess, knowing that although the truth could destroy the marriage and radically alter his entire life, he needed to be honest with Cynthia. After telling her what happened, he apologized profusely for his behavior and begged for her forgiveness. Cynthia was shocked, hurt, and angry. After taking some time to sort out her feelings, however, she was able to find the forgiveness in her heart to release the event and absolve Anthony of his transgression. They were both relieved that their relationship had a solid enough foundation to withstand this test. Although Cynthia's forgiveness made Anthony's heart ache a little less, he still needed to live with the internal repercussions of his lack of integrity. He had violated his own ethics, and even though he had made amends for the wrong that he caused, he would eventually need to forgive himself so that the gap between his ethics and his actions could close, and he could be free from guilt and shame. Over time, Antonio did in fact release his guilt, but the memory of how horrible he felt that night in the airport stayed to remind him to not stray against his own ethics. You see how your ethics can really put you through a whirlwind if you aren't in control. Humor. If it's of immense importance to learn to laugh at ourselves. Catherine Mansfield. Let's take a drink. I'm going to enjoy a glass of delicious water. Also in this moment, I would like to encourage you all to get a physical copy of the book. If Life is a Game, These Are the Rules. You can find the link down below in our Amazon store. Because I think it's important as we read these books and we learn together and we expand our consciousness that you get a physical copy of these books so that you can put your fingers on the text. You can really read and absorb this information from multiple different sources and multiple different angles. You know, you can hear it, you can see it, you can watch it, you can touch it, feel the knowledge. Let us continue. The lesson of humor means learning to invite levity and amusement into situations that might otherwise be disastrous. If you're going to view the hardships that happen to you as a slip-up or the slip-ups you make as lessons rather than mistakes, a sense of humor will prove to be helpful. When you learn to laugh at your mishaps, you are able to instantaneously transform perceived bad situations into opportunities to learn something about the absurdity of human behavior. Most especially your own. Absolutely. Humor and laughter are also tremendously important in relationships. Sharing a good laugh with somebody does wonders. A friend of mine told me that once, when she and her husband were having a disagreement, he made a face that struck her as so comical she bursted out laughing. They both realized how silly they were being and were able to share a laugh and resolve their conflict with a new perspective. As Victor Borg said, laughter is the closest distance between two people. The health benefits, both mental and physical, of humor are well documented. A good laugh can diffuse tension, relieve stress, and release endorphins into the system, which act as a natural mood elevator. In Norman Cousins' books, Anatomy of the Illness, Cousins describes the regimen he followed to overcome a serious, debilitating disease that he had suffered from. It included large doses of laughter and humor. Published in 1976, his book was widely read and accepted by the medical community. Laughter causes misery to vanish. It teaches you to lighten up and take yourself less seriously, even in the most serious of situations. It can also help you gain some much-needed perspective. A young woman named Elisa spent close to a year planning her wedding. She and her fiancé invited over 300 people to what was to be the lavish, formal affair in a beautiful banquet hall. She wanted to be so perfect, so she paid close attention to every last detail, right down to the cocktail napkins. The big day came and everything went brilliantly until a very expensive wedding cake was rolled out. A wheel at the table got caught on a wire and the cake went flying through the air, finally landing in a big chocolate and icing splattered mess on the dance floor. Boy, all the guests held their breath as they looked at Elisa, expecting her to burst into tears. Much to everyone's surprise, she looked down at the cake, started to laugh and joked, and said, "Hey, I ordered a vanilla cake." So give yourself permission to laugh. You'll be amazed at how quickly a crisis can turn into a comedy. Yeah, when you invite in humor. Let's read that again. So you give yourself permission to laugh. You'll be amazed at how quickly a crisis can turn into comedy when you invite in humor. This concludes chapter 3 of If Life is a Game, These Are the Rules. Again, I encourage you to get a physical copy down below so that we can read these books together. As you can see, we've got a lot of reading material here. We'll be changing studios, so it is what it is. The background will change shortly, but that's beyond me. But it's important, I personally think it's important to get hard copies of these books, just so that you have references for yourself. Okay, guys? So again, this concludes chapter 3. I would also like to encourage you to get my book, How to Get It, A Brief Guide to Getting in Tune with Your Inner Self. This one is just dropped as well too. This one is really just a brief guide and understanding, as the name implies, about how to get in tune with yourself. And once you can understand what it is, you can begin to change the world around you. And with that, I bid you all a farewell. Until next time, guys, love you lots. Excited to see you guys in the next one. We'll be reading chapter 4 shortly. Perhaps I might be in the same outfit, perhaps not, depending on the time. I am feeling a little tired now, so I think I will go to bed. So guys, until next time, love you lots. See you soon. I'm out.